All right, Jim, I'm going to start with a fastball at you. You ready to retire?
Am I ready to retire? That was a fastball, boy. Um, I am ready to retire. I've been to retire for a long time now.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I'm
As
just
you
kidding.
tell.
No, I actually, retirement in our business is something that is probably something that you really don't do. I would like to slow down at some point in time and turn the keys over to somebody else. But in terms of working with clients and doing what I do, I love doing that. So I don't necessarily find this real desire to walk away from it and go do something else.
All right. That's the Bay Point approved answer. He loves the clients so much. You can't walk away. You can't imagine. It's like you can't go to the beach every day, golf, shuffleboard,
I,
pickleball. No.
I think on the surface, there's a bit of an irony in that, to Jim's point, it's in our business, kind of this kind of hard stop retirement isn't something that we see as much. But and I think it's kind of that traditional idea of retirement, you can work to a certain point, hard stop, retire, and then move on to life of leisure and other pursuits, hobbies, other activities that you haven't had time for. And I think the irony is just kind of, we work with so many clients kind of helping navigate into retirement. And that's, the objective for a lot of our clients to kind of work to a certain point and hard stop retire. But I think the irony actually bears a lot of truth because I think for so many people, defining for themselves what retirement means and working kind of gradually phasing out over time from work, transitioning gradually, I would say. So where retirement isn't kind of a hard stop point in time, but rather a period of time. I think there's a lot of truth, and there's a lot of more recent evidence to suggest that there's a lot of psychological benefit to approaching retirement in that way. And I'm just rambling because I don't actually have an answer. I haven't yet defined for myself what retirement is, but that's where the evidence is pointing right now is that psychologically retirees are better positioning themselves when there's a gradual phase out from one chapter of life into another. That hard stop, abrupt change can be what a lot of folks work to and can be successful in that transition, but that transition is very much kind of a cold turkey type of transition, and it can be really jarring for a lot of people.
Definitely. And, I swear we'll broaden the conversation out in a moment away from the introspection within the wealth management industry and planning profession. But, I wonder if that sort of reluctance to do the full stop, the cold turkey retirement, as you put it, Jake, if you see that across other industries that are, interpersonal, that are also helping professions. You hear about like therapists, for example, clinical psychologists, having a hard time retiring just all at once because, you develop these relationships over months, in many cases, years with patients and clients. And then, it's hard to walk away from. Like, it'd be very difficult to do all at once.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And, I guess maybe the service industry or what we do, or like you mentioned, a psychologist place where you're building these relationships, that's different than like, maybe being in some physically labor intensive type career where, your body just can't, take it any longer. So you may want to, or we may have to look at what you're doing prior to retirement and figure out if it's something you want to continue to do or you enjoy doing. I think in this business, we become pretty passionate about helping people and like you said, building relationships. I mean, a lot of our relationships are in this business. They're people we work with. And so it's important to maintain those from a mental health perspective. So yeah, defining what you're doing is probably a big factor in it.
Absolutely. And just sort of what we've been talking about right now, it dovetails pretty nicely with how your article opens. Jim has an article on the Baypoint site entitled, and I'm going to pull this up just so I am steering everyone in the right direction, entitled, "Am I Ready to Retire? Consider these 4 financial aspects." And before we get into the 4 financial aspects, it does start off by talking about the two big sort of supra aspects, right? So there's the financial aspect, do I have enough money question. But then there's the psychological aspect. Am I ready, like internally? Is this what I want? Is this what I desire? And if so, do I have a notional idea of what I'm going to do next? Because, Jake, to your point, that question, what comes next, is essential for, people, who are staring down, the reality of, ideally many decades more of, fruitful life.
Yeah, it's a really tough one, and we've seen it, in practice, many times where, those first few months, few years of retirement can be really enjoyable. You do have time to focus on a lot of things that you hadn't had, a lot of time to focus on during your, busy working life and career. But what we kind of see and coach clients on is that leisure in and of itself has diminishing returns, and kind of what we mean by that is that every night is Friday night. It feels really good for some period of time, and then kind of restlessness can settle in, and that's something that can be hard to overcome for some retirees, because we're not necessarily either expecting it or, kind of prepared for all of this time, that you now have kind of on your hands. How are you going to fill it? And, we're doing all the things we want to do, and they're still not filling up the day. And so that can be a real psychological challenge, I think, for many folks. And so something that we encourage, many of our clients to give some thought to well in advance of retirement. Go ahead and start to paint that picture of a day in the life once you stop working.
I think that's it. I mean, that's that first part of the article is you really have to sit down and figure out what that retirement looks like before you can do anything. What do you want to do in terms of to keep yourself mentally healthy, to keep yourself physically healthy? I think we talked in a previous one of these about where you want to live. Do you want to be around your kids? I think it's really, really important to focus on what that life after that job looks like, what you would replace those 8 hours a day with. You have to replace them with something else. Otherwise, you're sitting on the couch, and some people may want to do that, but you just have to give that some thought that, hey, I was going to work. I had this sort of work as a purpose for a lot of people. And sometimes when that purpose goes away, that's a really hard void to fill. And so I do think focusing from both a psychological, and we're also financial planners, obviously, we gotta focus on that piece of it, but we have to consider both. Financially, what does it look like? How much do I need to spend? How much do I need to have in the bank account? And then also, what do I need to do to prepare mentally for this?
It's Jim, that's a really good point. Just touching on purpose, because as financial planners, some folks may be scratching their heads and, what are we doing talking about psychology and kind of restlessness and, what do you do with your time? Financial planner, we should just be focused on the numbers. Are the numbers going to work? Can you afford your lifestyle, your level of consumption, all, and, what's the tax picture look like? What's the portfolio doing? We are focused on all of that. But what, we've seen in our experience is that, money is about so much more than just the numbers, right? We're focused on, our clients' entire financial lives. So how, can we help our clients use their financial resources? How can we help them align their money with their purpose? And it's certainly not our job to identify what any of our clients, purpose is, but it's to help align the financial piece with what that purpose is. And we have seen that kind of dilemma and that challenge at that transition of retirement with this recalibration of purpose. What am I getting up every day to do? I think it's a little bit more straightforward in your working career, and aligning your finances may be a little bit more straightforward in that you're working towards this objective, right? But as that changes, how does the financial component then change? So we're really living at that intersection between, the money and the numbers, and the purpose. So helping clients to align the two.
And part of that, of course, that alignment is figuring out, all right, so what is the purpose going to be? What am I going to do? And to put it sort of plainly, how much will that cost? And in reading the article, the question really comes down to how much will that cost on a monthly basis? Because as we all know, all of our clients know, and many people listening know, the largest determinant of the success or non-success of a financial plan is that spending rate, is spending in line with the available cash. And that's one of the few things, within the planning world that is about as straightforward as it gets. Spending is in line, success is more likely, spending is out of line, success is almost assuredly not. And for people who may be watching or listening who are approaching retirement, or in those very early days, or, not, maybe they're a few years, few decades out, but they're thinking, well, gosh, how am I going to know what I'm going to need on a monthly basis? I'll put it to both of you. How can they begin to figure that question out?
Yeah, Zach. So I do believe that the spending number is one of the biggest drivers of success, like you just mentioned, and really having a good understanding of what that looks like it is very, very important from a financial perspective.
Well, how do you get from point A to point B? Like you're planning in advance, a decade out, and okay, I'm spending X amount per month. How do I translate that into what I'm going to be doing in retirement?
But yeah, so I guess I would start out typically like looking at somebody's situation and saying, hey, how do you feel about your current standard of living? And trying to get an understanding of where people are spending currently, and looking at if they are living within their means, within their budget. Do they have a sense of how much they're spending on a regular basis? And then say, hey, would you want to continue this going forward? Are you happy with this? Or are there changes in your life that you would want to make that would increase your spending or decrease your spending? I mean, some people want to retire so bad that they're willing to cut expenses and reduce their standing of living just to not be able to work. And some people want to hang it up and they want to go travel and do a lot of other fun things, which may increase their expenses. So it's an exercise that definitely takes some time. It's understanding what you're spending currently and what might be an add-on or a subtraction, when you actually go into that retirement phase.
Yeah, I think this is one area, tracking living expenses or identifying living expenses. This is one area where it's really easy to get bogged down trying to be precise. But the fact of the matter is that, this is really an exercise in being approximately right. And so, because nobody knows down to the penny how much they're going to spend each year, it's always going to vary. And so, that exercise of, no matter where you are in the process towards retirement, of kind of calculating your living expenses, it starts with kind of a vision of the lifestyle that you want to live, your current level of consumption, having some expectation of an increase in that level of consumption over time, especially if you're decades out from retirement. That, something we call lifestyle creep. It's very real. So we want to kind of account for that. If you're spending, you may be spending 25% more at retirement than you were, 2 decades prior, just by changes in lifestyle. So, at the end of the day, we take the best available information. We take kind of everything the client says they want to do and achieve in retirement, put it all together into a set of, spending assumptions or guesses, really, in terms of what the spending is going to look like in retirement. And we want to hopefully be a little bit on the high side for planning purposes.
Jake, I'm just going to add to that a little bit because I think what you said is very important. So I do see people at times get really tied up in knots trying to figure out like the details of what they're spending, and even more difficult, what it might look like in the future. So I think it's important that there are assumptions that we do need to make, and you are not going to be able to calculate and foresee everything that might come your way in the future. And I think if you do that, you will end up freezing, and you could end up working, the rest of your life, just because you can't pull that trigger, because you can't get over some of these things that you don't know. And you may never know what they look like until that future actually happens.
Sort of moving on to the next that next idea of things to consider when considering, retirement and if you're ready, is, where are you drawing those funds from, right? Specifically, you might have, many people listening to this will have Social Security. Some people, increasingly few or decreasingly, rather, people might have private pensions through employers, depending on when they started working, depending on the industry they were in. But for a lot of people listening, and it seems for, many more people moving forward into the future, we're talking about people drawing from their defined contribution plans, their 401ks, through their employer, or their IRAs or Roth IRAs that may have established on their own. And one of the things necessary for that is, understanding the tax ramification of drawing from each of those accounts, right? Because it's different than when you're working. It's the same idea. The government wants its cut of the money, and it's going to get it. But it's sort of there's something different about it. It's not wages being, taxed. It's money that is yours being taxed at varying rates depending on the kind of account. It seems that educational piece is really necessary there in thinking about where you're drawing your income streams from.
Yeah, taxes, they're an expense in retirement. And, a lot of the simple sort of calculators out there, they take them into effect, but I don't think they do a true calculation on them. And they can be costly if you make the wrong tax withdrawals at the wrong times. Or you could lose out on future benefits, tax savings in the future if you make mistakes withdrawing your money. So taxes is an expense, and it is something that you can sort of control by where you withdraw the money from those accounts to fund that spending need that you have. So you have a little bit control over it, what that is, and it's an important factor of it.
Yeah, this is really, the whole exercise of going through the process to address the question, can I afford to retire? It really is putting together the pieces of a unique puzzle. Everybody's puzzle is a little bit different. So what are my expenses? What are my expenses at the beginning of retirement? How are those going to change through our retirement? Where are my potential sources of income in retirement? Do I have Social Security? Do I have a defined benefit pension plan? Am I drawing from, an old 401k plan or an IRA? Do I have a taxable account? So everybody has a different pieces to work with in their puzzle. And so it becomes then really important to kind of identify what makes the most sense from year to year. How can you be most efficient in coordinating all the different sources of income that you have in your unique puzzle? And it's something that's also not static. So you don't necessarily set it and forget it in that first year of retirement and say, okay, I got my plan. I'm going to take my money from here in this amount, from here in this amount, and grab Social Security, and maybe I have a pension. Whatever that combination is, it's likely to change over time. And with good planning, it probably should change over time.
Sort of funny, Jake, that you mentioned that it's not a set it and forget it, exercise in drawing retirement income, if only because that's often good advice for people pre-retirement when it comes to building that asset, building those investments. The thing you do is to set it and forget it. Don't think about it too much. Don't check the account when you're adding to it. Just, decide upon your contribution rate, and if anything, increase it over time. But, don't spend too much time sort of quibbling with the details. The minute it's converted.
The set and forget it, Zach, is definitely applies, or more applies to the investments, we'll say. We don't want you changing your investments on a regular basis. That's more like, hey, you have a long-term perspective here. Let's put it, and let's not make reactions or have reactions to what's happening in the market. I do think it's a little bit different on the planning side of things, and
sure,
it is helpful to look at that on a regular basis, because your income changes over time. So how do I say this correctly? Like decisions you make in terms of where you save now while you're accumulating will affect those future your future taxes. And so they're really important decisions to make. And as you go through your career, I do think it's really important to look at those on a regular basis. And as Jake mentioned, they're going to be changing often.
No, that's definitely true. Never let it be said that I told everyone here to only engage in financial planning once.
No, that wasn't interpreted that way. That's just me being a little picky.
But Jake, to your, to that larger point, the idea of, it not being a static, that idea of retirement income withdrawal not being static, being something that you can go back to and sort of fine tune as your needs change over the course of retirement. I'm just, curious for the two of you, how often do you think is a healthy amount to do that? Is it the kind of thing where you're nearing the beginning of a new year and it's like, all right, well, what do my income need this year? So you do it maybe once every calendar year or more often or less often?
Definitely. I mean, definitely needs to be done each year would be my first blush response. Jim, you may have a similar opinion.
Yeah, that's it. Each year. I mean, so you guys have talked about these income sources that you have. So you have your Social Security or your pension, and they're going to give you a certain amount, and then each year you got to fill that gap, figure out where your additional money is going to come from. And so looking at it on an annual basis is the right way to go. I mean, you set up a plan maybe in the beginning of the year, mid-year to replenish the cash that you're going to need for the next 6 months to 12 months. And you look at it from a tax perspective. All right, where am I going to get that money in the most tax efficient way possible?
Yeah, it's definitely an iterative process to review this each and every year. Circumstances change, objectives can change, laws can change. So, change is what's constant, to be honest. Yeah. And so it's important to just monitor and make sure that we're taking advantage of all the opportunities that currently exist in kind of a, optimal way for each client.
And one of the things, Jim, that your article also went into a bit was some of the rules of thumb that people use in, figuring out what kind of, what the retirement income needs are going to be. Specifically, the most famous one, of course, likely being the 4% rule, which I believe hails from the mid 1980s, the Trinity University study, I think, with the professors in California who came up with that number. And Jake, you and I have talked about the 4% rule a bit, and I was wondering if you might, for those who are unfamiliar with it, might be able to go into a bit of detail on what that entails.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a fantastic study. It was really groundbreaking. William Bingen is the kind of original author for the study. And basically, the original study, and it's been tested many times since, looked at kind of retirement period beginning in each year from originally 1926 to 1976, which I think was the first time period that was tested. And it said, okay, how much can you take out from a portfolio, if you entered into retirement in any one of these years? And basically the idea was, and the conclusion of the study was, that if you set your withdrawal rate at 4%, you could navigate any sequence of returns in markets, with a balanced portfolio. And this really brought to light the idea of a sequence of returns risk for those entering into retirement. And that's the idea that you really get bad luck in that your portfolio has very poor returns in the first few years of retirement, just as you're taking money out. And the combination of poor returns and a distribution need from the portfolio in those first few years places risk on the longevity for your portfolio being able to pay you for decades to come. And so the 4% rule was basically, the idea that said, okay, you can take 4% out and you don't have to make any adjustments. You can navigate any sequence of returns that the market hands you.
Yeah, it's a good rule of thumb. And just so when you're just take a like sort of this initial look at somebody's situation. If they need $40,000 a year and they have $1,000,000, in theory they can take 4% of that, or $40,000 a year. What people miss sometimes is that if with that sequences of returns, if your portfolio goes down, and you're taking 4% of a lower number, you will need to adjust your spending a bit. So sometimes that's missed in the overall equation, but it does give you a good sense of, will I have enough? And a good starting point in terms of looking at your overall situation.
Yeah, it's entirely a rule of thumb, and you can build a good plan based on an adequate rule of thumb. But circumstances may vary, and you could have a very strong plan with a higher withdrawal rate than 4% in those first few years. If, say, for example, your withdrawal rate decreases later on in retirement, say, for example, after you start Social Security. So you can go from a higher withdrawal rate initially to a much lower withdrawal rate once Social Security kicks in, as just, I think, a common example. So 4% is a good rule of thumb, but it's just that. It's a rule of thumb.
Yeah, and then things may change too. And sorry, Zach, things may change in the future. You may run into a long-term care event where you need more or something like that. So it's just really hard to just say, hey, this is what we're going to use, and that's it. So there are things to consider.
And that is to say, just for audience clarification here, the 4% rule, the goal of which is to not exhaust the portfolio, not necessarily stay at a steady state, but not to get to zero, to become superannuated, as the literature might call it.
I think it's also maybe just kind of a nice segue towards investment returns, because ultimately you're beginning to, kind of get to that intersection between your retirement income and your investable portfolio, your investment assets. And so how are these two pieces of the puzzle fitting together? And so I think it really kind of begins to, lead to the question of, okay, how do I pay myself from my portfolio of investments? And what investments am I positioning in my portfolio so that I can generate income year over year in this way, pay myself that 4% per year.
And we are nearing Jim's laughing. What's Jim laughing at?
So we keep having some dead space, but we'll work through it. We're good. That's all.
We're about to talk about investment allocations and things like that. We're out of time. So
we're nearing the end of our clock. I just wanted to hit you both with a later question, similar to the question at the top, which was, of course, are you ready to retire? But what are you going to do in retirement? Let's say you retire. What's next for Jim and Jake?
Going to manage my sequence of returns.
Yeah, I'm going to manage my portfolio all day long. No, it's hard, when you have that pot of money. I mean, we're experiencing it now that when markets are down, and people are only living off their investments, it gets difficult. So anyways, I think Jake, last time we talked, was moving to Alaska to salmon fish or something like that, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, moving back to Alaska, I'm going to get a gold claim and just pan for gold all day, and